at a town hall meeting to present his plans to the business community in Lagos on Tuesday. Bola Tinubu, presidential candidate of Nigeria's ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, APC, has said his administration will remove fuel subsidy, liberalize the petroleum sector, and target double-digit economic growth if elected into office next year. The APC presidential candidate and his team also answered different questions on the party's plans for different sectors of the economy, including insecurity and women inclusion in governance. Tinubu, who attended the event with his running mate, Shettima, former Borno State governor, and several members of his campaign team, noted that the current subsidy arrangement in Nigeria favored certain sections of the population against the general interest of the society, stressing that it should be discontinued. Joining us now is Olu Arowolo Vehijen and Asuquo Ekpenyong to discuss how the Tinubu Shettima economic plans will be implemented. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Vehijen and also Ekpenyong. Good to have you on the program. First, I would like the two of you to take us through that manifesto. 80 pages long. It's titled Renewed Hope 2023. Just, to take us through it, as the background for our conversation around the key highlights. Let me start with you, Vehijen.
Thank you. And Olu is fine. Olu is fine. Okay. So that manifesto is a blueprint for the key objectives of double-digit growth to lift millions of Nigeria out of poverty and restore confidence in our economy. There are different aspects of it that we can speak to. In my case, I can speak to the oil and gas aspects of the manifesto. And essentially, one of the things that is key if you want to achieve, the oil and gas sector accounts for less than 10% of the GDP, but accounts for 90% of foreign exchange earnings and about 60% of fiscal income. That sector needs quite a bit of improvements around around security and addressing crude theft so that we can get back to double digits. One of the things that the Tinubu Shettima team have outlined as their main objectives for the oil sector is to address insecurity and crude theft to restore the over 800 barrels of production that is currently shutting and restore LNG capacity to about 60%. That's the first step. The next step, obviously, is to now address about 800,000 barrels of production that is per day that is currently shut in due to those challenges. So the first thing is to enforce a framework, the existing security apparatus, and make improvements in areas that are required to ensure that we can bring that production back on stream. Because if you look at that at current prices, that's about $2.4 billion a month that we don't have access to. So that's the first objective and the primary objective. When you do that, you restore confidence for investors and hopefully then attract more investments for growth in areas like LNG Train 7 and more, and bringing your production back to about 4 million barrels per day by 2030, which is what's stated in the manifesto.
Okay. Asuquo Ekpenyong, your take.
Thank you very much, sir. The Tinubu Shettima administration is looking to grow the economy by double digits. And one of the greatest ways to do that is by strengthening the SME sector, small, medium enterprise. It would serve as a great catalyst to economic growth. The SMEs today in Nigeria account for 96% of businesses, contributes about 84% to employment, but just contributes 48% to the gross domestic product. The Tinubu Shettima administration will be focused on growing SMEs to strengthen and grow the economy. It would address this by ensuring that there's adequately priced capital available to deserving SMEs. It would also work assiduously to bridge the infrastructure gap, the deficit that exists currently in the area of road transportation, rail transportation, ports. But beyond that, it would address aggressively the power problems to see how they can ramp up manufacturing and production locally in Nigeria. Beyond that, it would look to build capacity within the SME sector so that they can compete like for like with their counterparts outside the country. It will strengthen SMEs to be able to leverage and, take opportunities in the 1.3 billion people market created by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It would look into the Smeden Act, review it, revise it if necessary to empower the institution to be able to carry out these reforms amongst many others.
Okay, so two things. Let me come to you. To ramp up production. A lot of people argue with you that crude oil theft is not only the problem. The wells are moribund. Mm-hmm. How do you fix that? And the IOCs are not ready to spend money on them, which is the major investment you need. So how would you will you be able to fix that in the first place? NNPC has also gone private.
Correct.
Here. Mm-hmm. And that comes with NNPC doing its own part that it's not doing.
Correct.
Is it still going to run the model of the president to be Minister of Petroleum thing and he oversees, but there's still loopholes everywhere?
So let's talk about the IOC's exits. So IOC's exiting mature oil and gas provinces is nothing new in the energy sector. That's what happens all the time. They've been operating here since the 60s. Once your cost structure becomes too uncompetitive because of declining production, you exit to independence with leaner cost structures. That happens all over the world, and Nigeria is no exception. Yes, crude theft has accelerated that process and complicated it in many ways. But you see the IOCs exiting not the country, but the onshore business. They are going offshore, and they're staying in the gas business. So will you be able to, if you address the general insecurity, if you aggressively address the crude theft problem and lower the carbon intensity of your production, you should be able to attract investments to independents who have much more leaner structures to help you invest in those infrastructure and wells that you were talking about.
But most of those wells are now owned by Nigerians and Nigerian companies. They can't even service it. I mean,
Correct.
You saw what happened to the Christmas tree. The wells are moribund. So who will bring in that big capital injection? That's what I asked.
So the people who will bring that, so when you're looking at an investment framework, you just don't look at independent micro businesses. You look at the macro picture. The macro picture, if the environment is stable, you have rule of law, you have sanctity of contracts, you have general security, you have crude theft being addressed so that you lower the carbon intensity of your oil operations, capital flows to those sectors, whether you're independents or whether you're IOCs. We have to do what is within our control. Energy prices have gone up. People are, other oil producers, I cited the example of Australia. Yes, the energy transition is accelerating, but the energy sources of today are the ones who are driving the economies of those countries. Saudi Aramco was able to earn $42 billion in profits in Q2 alone. Australia has less than 40% of our gas reserves. They've been able to they're on track to earn $56 billion in revenue from LNG sales. We can do those things here if we address the macro environment.
But we've not done those things in over 40 years, because these are the problems since the 70s in this country. So what are the assurances that you're going to, something we've not done in over 40 to 50 years, what are the assurances that you're going to get them done in 8 years? What is your plan?
Well, you have to send the right signals immediately. And the right signals around oil and gas is really an enforcement of your security infrastructure and architecture. That sends the right signals to investors that we have a serious business, we have a serious administration in place. The right signal to send around gas production is the right commercial cost-reflective tariffs. So when you address security, then you need to address the source of cash flow for those businesses. When you deregulate and liberalize that sector, you also you boost their confidence from the investor community. When you address all the other regulatory barriers that drive costs and extend your project timelines, you boost confidence. Those are the first things you need to do to signal to the investment community that you're serious and we're open for business, that we're changing direction.
Okay, I'm sure both of you are aware that this APC manifesto has been severely criticized by the opposition. and other concerned stakeholders. You may say, coming from the opposition, what do you expect them to say anyway? But they've complained about certain omissions in the document. One, that the document does not really offer any concrete ideas about how to deal with crude oil theft, which is a major issue. Second, the oil and gas sector that you have been talking about, Olu, they also say that, look, the document just says we will encourage the oil companies to give more assistance to the host communities. Okay? Some of the critics say, no, that's not the way to go about it. It's not throwing money at it, giving money to the host communities. What are those concrete ideas about what you do with those host communities that we have seen suffering from oil spills, from damages, from a dilapidated infrastructure? The third major criticism is that it is a copy and paste manifesto. The fourth criticism is that it lacks depth, particularly with regard to concrete, ideas, and it pays no attention whatsoever to the big issue of corruption. Those who have, done an X-ray of the document say, why is it that this document is not talking about corruption? I don't know who wants to address some of those criticisms, beyond partisanship. Ekpenyong, you want to start?
Maybe you could deal with the oil and gas theft, and then I'll address some of the issues maybe on security.
Yes, correct. For the oil and gas theft, the framework to address that is in place. And so let's take the host community fund that you mentioned. That is already, and the details around that are already outlined in the PIA. We are moving into the implementation phase of the PIA, and there will be consultative engagements with the business community and the various stakeholders, including the communities, on how to ensure that that host community fund delivers a few things. First thing, the much needed development in those communities. The second is to restore the environment in those communities, to address the environmental degradation that has occurred in those communities. And the third piece of it is making sure that they have a sense, that the communities have a sense of ownership, that they are incentivized to protect the national assets that are within their communities. The details of that will be worked out in the implementation of the PIA. So maybe, you would probably be accused of copying and pasting the PIA if you had to put all of those details as well in the manifesto. But that is the vehicle for which a lot of the details will be implemented under the PIA and the host community fund. With crude theft, it is just an issue of, it's a wider issue which also addresses corruption, which is how do you improve the rule of law, restore confidence in the rule of law, restore confidence in contract sanctity. And by doing that, you make sure that you have a leader who has the political will to take on vested interests and enforce the structure that we have in place to address insecurity and to address crude theft. It's political will. Most of the ideas, most of the things that we need to do are there. It is the enforcement, the will to enforce. And I think that's what differentiates this particular, will differentiate this particular administration.
Thank you very much, Olu. Doctor, you mentioned that the opposition has been criticizing the document. It is their job to criticize the manifesto. But I think what the incoming administration is looking forward to is constructive criticism. It's very important. And
the incoming administration.
Yes,
we haven't had the election yet.
By the grace of God, incoming administration.
The election is still next year.
But let me say this. The problems, when people talk about the debt, I think you realize it's an 80-page document, and there's only so much depth you can put inside. But I believe on Tuesday, during the town hall, Asuquo, Tinubu, and Shettima gave some analysis and some in-depth figures as to how they plan to address issues on the economy and issues on insecurity. Issues of insecurity are not far-fetched. A weak economy will always lead to some level of insecurity. One of the greatest challenges Nigeria has is inadequate jobs for our teeming youth, sustainable jobs and gainful employment for our teeming youth. And there's an adage my mom always said to me as a young man, which is, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. We need to create employment. We need to get our young and very active youths positively engaged. Now, in the absence of that, there will be, they tend to channel that energy and that innovation into negative aspects. But when an economy is robust and is working and growing, there will be positive deployment of those resources. Now, obviously, when it comes to security, there are some elements that have crossed the Rubicon and have gone far and may not be able to reverse back. And Asuquo Tinubu said on Tuesday that they will engage, the administration will engage with them frontally. And what is engagement? It's three things. And he spoke about them: people, skills, equipment. The military would be recruiting and engaging to bulk up our human resources. He spoke about equipment. There will be deployment of tactical gear, better surveillance and ground surveillance, better communications equipment to identify, monitor, and track. And skills, there'll be human capital development. And our resources will be deployed to the field to engage with and resolve the issues of insecurity. As he said, there will be a full engagement to ensure that this issue is resolved, insecurity, or there is a surrender or utter devastation to the insurgents.
I mean,
No, you have not addressed the issue about the omission with regard to corruption, which is a major point of criticism. Who is going to address that?
So
She did it.
I did.
Yeah, when you were talking about crude oil theft.
No, I did. I said the general environment, a macro picture where you have a functioning independent judiciary, where you have sanctity of contracts, that tends to reduce corruption. So we've talked about different forms of rent seeking. If you have a wider environment where you have, where the biggest, as we said, the biggest issues around, if you're able to restore confidence in the judicial sector, in the rule of law, in contract sanctity, you reduce corruption. If there are consequences, as Asuquo outlined on Tuesday, if there's confidence that if you are that will first provide a broad-based economic growth that is able to, that not only is, when we talk about that, he talked about double-digit growth, a minimum of 6%, and that is intentional. It has to exceed our population growth rate of 3%. When you do that, and as Asuquo has just mentioned, you create an environment where people are actually productively employed in a positive way, and then you have the wider framework of sanctity of contracts, rule of law, there is less corruption, but there is no absence of corruption, as you very, very well know, in any other climates.
These are textbook ideas. We'll see.
So a lot of it, the practicality of it, is flat on its feet. And I'll give you an instance. You were talking about signaling the economy.
Correct.
It doesn't work, and I'll prove it to you.
Okay.
You see, after 20 years, we signed the PNID. Where are the investors in the IOC? Isn't removal of subsidies supposed to be part of the PNID? Why has this administration and APC administration stalled on it? So it's just still the things that worked for you and the cherry picking that goes on. And that's why I deliberately asked the question about who will service those moribund, facilities in this sector. You said once we signal, the investment will come. We've not been able to do it in a while. In over 15 years, we've battled Boko Haram, albeit a general that your party sold to us in 2015 said it was going to solve he's not been able to solve the problem. So the question is, what differently are you going to do on ground? You talked about the sanctity of contract. You saw how the PNID was denigrated recently, when there was a back and forth between the presidency and NUPRC as regards, giving an all clear on a particular oil deal. We saw all that. So what would you do differently? You talk about political will. A lot of people say, how will that happen overnight?
So I think you mean the PIA.
PIA.
Correct.
Yeah, PIA. Sorry,
Okay.
PIA.
Okay.
Petroleum Industry Act.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm here to talk about what Asuquo will do, not the current administration. And I think
So you're dissociating yourself
No,
from the
no,
current
I'm not
administration?
dissociating myself. I'm here.
You're not proud of their record?
The conversation today, and I think I heard your previous segment, which was that we weren't going to engage in political rhetoric and we were going to focus on the substance of the issues, and that's what we're here to do. And on the substance of the issues, you have to look at people's track records. And this particular candidate has a track record of delivering. You may disagree with with many other things or many other people, but these particular candidates, Asuquo Tinubu and His Excellency Governor Shettima, have a track record of delivering on these things. And it is important. The track record is, if you look at Lagos State today, where you said you have the ability to, this is one of the biggest economies on the subcontinent. Yes, and so even though it is a subnational, so there's track record here. Nobody's, and nobody is disclaiming the fact that this will be a challenge, and it is not an easy job to turn around an economy this big. But the point that we were discussing, the point that is really, what is really important, you were talking about federal rates in the U.S. earlier in your segment. That is a signaling. We were talking about when you set certain inflationary targets, what you do on policy making is signaling to investment communities, and people take positions based on your signals as a government. That's what you're supposed to do.
But it's not worked in the U.S. You can see the Fed
it is
rates
working in the U.S. Where
it has not reduced inflation. You can see, so it's not every time signaling even works in the U.S.
So interest rate is one aspect of it. But I listened to your earlier segment where they were talking about the fact that, yes, the depth of the recession may be different. So we're talking about how to make sure that 90 million Nigerians who currently live in poverty are lifted out of that poverty, so that when you make policy decisions that have certain adverse impacts, it is not completely critical and destroying, and we're not as volatile as of an economy. That's what the focus of the future is. We welcome ideas, and we also welcome execution capacity. What we're saying is that you send the right signals, you demonstrate that you have the execution capacity, and that is what Asuquo has demonstrated in Lagos State. That's what the Governor Shettima has demonstrated around insecurity in Borno State. I encourage you to listen to the content of what they have to say and review their own track record and make your judgment about whether or not they have the capacity to deliver on their promises.
Olu and Asuquo would like to thank you very much. I'm sure this won't be the last moment when we'll be discussing this. We still have quite a number of months leading up to the election. Yes, and there will be another opportunity to further interrogate the manifesto of your party and your candidate, and also of other parties. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very, very much.